In an MTG world with a growing number of EDHREC based decks, it's very easy to get sucked into slotting the same cards into your eat your veggies slots like removal or card draw or board wipes, because that's just what you need to do to keep up. If you play white, it feels like you need to run Swords to Plowshares or Path to Exile, because why wouldn't you? The issue with always running these staples is that at some point, your deck is no longer your deck. It can begin to feel like every other deck running your colors, but with maybe a different commander and a few variable slots. I create these unpopular card videos to give you some new ideas to break away from EDHREC, because these are all unpopular enough that they never really break into the EDHREC recommendations infinite loop cycle to get discovered by the masses. Today, we'll be discussing 7 removal options that are all played in less than 1% of decks that are eligible to play them. So let's jump right in. The first card we'll talk about today is Suspend, which is played in 0.72% of decks that can run this. So about 7 out of every 1,000 decks that have blue in it use this card. Suspend is a 1 mana blue instant that says exile target creature and put 2 time counters on it. If it doesn't have Suspend, it gains Suspend. So there's a few things that I like about this card as a removal option. 1, this is only 1 mana and it is at instant speed. So that is incredible efficiency in terms of removal spells. No, it isn't permanent, but 2 time counters, especially in the late game, is plenty of time to work with before the threat returns to the battlefield. Number 2, it exiles the creature, so it gets around indestructibility and regeneration. With this, it doesn't proliferate, doesn't work on it, because the card is in exile. But there are other cards that you can use if you're running maybe like a time themed deck like clock spinning or time crafting to put more time counters on the threat in question. Number 3, this spell becomes more efficient when you don't cast it on your turn, so it can help kind of with that threat assessment style. Rather than spending the mana on your turn because something is scary, you're incentivized to cast this on your opponent's turn, and maybe you won't even need to cast this at all because the threat that you were worried about isn't even attacking you, but it's being used, it's kind of like an ally because they're attacking a different opponent instead. The reason why this is beneficial on an opponent's turn is because if you cast this on your turn, let's say your opponent goes next. So when their turn starts, they remove 1 of the 2 counters on it. That means they only need to wait 1 more rotation around the table before they get their creature back. Or, in other words, 5 people passing their turns. But if you cast it on their turn, they need to wait an entire rotation around the table to remove the first time counter, then another rotation to remove the second. So in this case, that would be 8 people passing their turns before they get their creature back instead of just 5. The last thing that I will mention about this card is that you can also use it on your own creature to save it from a board wipe or a removal spell. So the flexibility in deciding if you want to hold this up as a protection or a removal spell is super nice, because I can't think of many other removal spells in the game that can double up as a benefit to cast on your own creature. Yeah, you could do it with Path to Exile, but that gets rid of your creature, but this one saves it from a board wipe. The next card is one that I have been including in a lot of my decks that run red, and that is Zoyowa's Justice, which also ironically sees play in only 0.72% of decks that can run it. Zoyowa's Justice is a 2 mana instant that says the owner of target artifact or creature with mana value 1 or greater, shuffles it into their library. Then that player discovers X, where X is its mana value. This card is great as a removal for a big threat. It is instant speed, it's only 2 mana, and it works against creatures and artifacts. Yeah, I know, it's not a Chaos Warp, but then again, Chaos Warp is played in 51 times as many decks as this. And in terms of red removal, to creatures with indestructible or other big threats, maybe with like big butts, this is not a bad alternative, and it's 1 mana less than Chaos Warp. I will say, I have removed someone's big threat before, and they rolled into a Rhystic Study, but I've also had them roll into a 1 mana do nothing spell in the late game, which I would trade for, a Terror of the Peaks or another huge threat any day. Funny enough, this card has one of the big benefits that I also mentioned about Suspend, and that is that you can use this on your own creature as well, which is just awesome. This doesn't specify target opponent's artifact or creature like many cards do, and unlike Chaos Warp, this is guaranteed to get you something if you cast it on your creature, because you roll until you get something that is equal to or less than its CMC. So in a pinch, let's say you cast this on one of your 7 mana creatures, or an 8 mana like Uvara Hellkite, CMC creature in response to a removal spell on the stack. Rather than letting the creature die, it goes back into your library if you cast this on it, and you can end up with another great 7 or 8 mana option to replace it. And the nice thing about Discover, as opposed to Cascade, is that you can choose to put it in your hand if you roll into like a counterspell or something that isn't relevant to cast at this very moment, so you can save it. And I mean, this is only 12 cents, so this is a great option to fit in your red decks as a removal option. If in this video you do like some of the cards that I mentioned enough to decide to buy them, it would mean the world if you do use the TCG Player affiliate link that's in the description of this video. This is actually my first time ever having an affiliate link as a new YouTuber, so using the link as a way to support means more than you know. The next removal spell we'll talk about today is Murderous Cut, which is played in 0.49% of decks that can play it. Murderous Cut is a 5 mana instant with Delve that says destroy target creature. I won't dive into too much about this card because there isn't really too much to say. This card was first printed 11 years ago in Khans of Tarkir, and graveyard decks have received a lot more support since then. This card can be easily a 1 mana instant speed removal spell with no condition on what kind of creature it can remove. It's only 26 cents, so if you're planning to mill your own cards, discard, storm, or have cards in your graveyard for any reason whatsoever, then this is an excellent removal spell that can oftentimes outperform top removal spell options like Feed the Swarm, which is in over 500,000 decks. Our fourth card today is Ashes to Ashes, which sees play in 0.14% of decks that can play it. This is a 3 mana sorcery spell that says Ashes to Ashes removes 2 target non-artifact creatures from the game and deals 5 damage to you. What's nice about this card is that for 3 mana, you're able to exile, not destroy 2 big threats from the game, assuming they are not artifact creatures. I think the restriction of not hitting artifact creatures is less limiting than other removal spells like Doomblade, or maybe along that same lines, Reckless Spite and Slaughter, which hit non-black creatures. The bummer about this card, however, is that it is a sorcery, but so is Feed the Swarm, which, as I mentioned earlier, is in over 500,000 decks. Granted, Feed the Swarm hits enchantments as well, which is rarer in black, but hitting 2 threats and exiling them also has its own merits, especially being able to hit tougher targets like the gods that are becoming more and more abundant. The life loss is there, and yeah, 5 mana, 5 life is nothing to laugh at, but in Commander, that is much more manageable than in a 1v1 format. And not to mention, many commanders would actually prefer the loss of life ability, like Villas Broker of Blood, to draw 5 cards on top of exiling 2 creatures, Rowan Sign of War to reduce spell costs by 5, and even Greven Predator Captain to gain +5/+0. It depends, on what set of this card you want to buy, but you can get it for as little as 43 cents for the 5th edition version, which is a removal option that could fit in pretty much any budget deck. Can anyone who's been playing Magic for a long time actually tell me, has this card ever been popular? Or has it always been kind of like this pretty unpopular option as a removal spell like it is today? I'd love to hear, especially since, I haven't been playing, I've only been playing since 2010, so not when this came out. We now have our second tie of the day, and that is Flood the Engine, which is also played in just 0.14% of eligible decks, or 1,120 total decks. This is a new card from Aetherdrift, but I have, a feeling that many people don't know this card exists because they likely overlooked Aetherdrift as a set overall. Flood the Engine is a 3 mana enchantment that says, enchant creature or vehicle. When this aura enters, tap enchanted permanent. Enchanted permanent loses all abilities and doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. I think humble effects like this are super underrated. Cards like Amphibian Downpour, I love that one. Eaten by Piranhas, also great card. Frogify, Kasmina's Transmutation, and Witness Protection are all great blue removal spells. Those all are much more well known than this card and see play, but there are 2 advantages that I think this card is worth mentioning. One is that this taps down the creature, and that is most likely going to remain tapped indefinitely. So unless someone is playing these untapped spells, then likely the commander or whatever creature you cast this on won't become untapped for the rest of the game or until it dies. The reason why this is relevant is because with cards like Witness Protection, if you cast Witness Protection on someone's commander, they're most likely just going to block with that creature the very next chance they get, so they can just recast their commander, essentially turning Witness Protection into like a delayed destroy spell on the commander. However, with Flood the Engine, the player does not get the luxury of blocking with their commander to take it back to the command zone. Even if they did manage to get the creature untapped, it does not become a 1/1, so it is much more difficult to remove the humble effect because the commander likely won't die from literally any creature swinging at it, like a simple 1/1 could take it out, and it also loses effects like trample if it's big. If a player doesn't have access to these untap effects, which I think most decks don't run, then the player will need to either use an enchantment removal on this card, wait for a board wipe, or use their own removal spell on their commander in order to recast it. But that could be several turns until they draw an answer, so that is a really effective shutdown spell. With this tap down effect, I think it feels much more like Imprisoned in the Moon than it does Frogify or Witness Protection, because the player can't chump block to just get their commander back. Granted, I will say Imprisoned in the Moon is much more savage because the creature is no longer a creature and thus doesn't die to board wipes. But on the bright side, this spell is much less likely to receive salt than if you cast an Imprisoned in the Moon on someone's commander. The second benefit that I'll mention is that this does hit vehicles as well, but I don't know how often you'll need that mode. Also, as a side note, if you do like this card as a removal option, another card you may have missed from a similarly unpopular set is Stop Cold from Outlaws of Thunder Junction, which is played in 2,620 decks. This is the same humility and tap down effect, but it has the added benefit of flash and being able to hit any artifact as opposed to just vehicles as well. But it comes at the cost of 1 additional mana. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on Imprisoned in the Moon? It's obviously a very effective removal spell, but do you personally run it? Like, what is the overall sentiment you have seen from people when they get hit by it? If you are enjoying these cards, be sure to check out our Unpopular MTG Patreon, where we try to break away from EDHREC. We share unpopular card recommendations and discuss deck lists for pretty much everything we're working on. We'd definitely love to have you. We are now down to our last 2 cards, and in a color that has a lot of removal spell competition, but I'm actually a really big fan of these spells. The first one is Oust, which is played in a measly 0.07% of decks, or in other words, 7 out of every 10,000 decks that can run it. Oust is a 1 mana white sorcery that says, put target creature into its owner's library, second from the top. Its controller gains 3 life. I love this card, and there's a few reasons why. 1, it always feels great casting it, equally in the early game as it does in the late game. This can be a huge tempo disruptor spell against aggro decks or ramp decks, and sometimes it can even be better, like a bigger tempo swing to hit a small mana dork or a creature than a bigger one. This doesn't get rid of the creature permanently, but in the early game, this can set the opponent back a turn or two because 1, it gets rid of small creatures they were depending on to either ramp or create value in some way. And number 2, it gets rid of their draw in 2 turns. So drawing something on turn 3 that was already on your board on turn 1 disrupts a lot of plans. I'm not saying that I always do this or that I do this a lot, but I am mentioning this because it is an option and it can be a very efficient answer to decks that want to hit the ground running, like Arabella, Abandoned Doll, or Slicer or Hired Muscle. When you're not hitting early game threats and using it as a card draw removal, it's also a very efficient removal spell against big creatures later in the game, because if someone spends 5 mana on a creature, in 2 turns they lose their draw, and then they have to re-spend that 5 mana just to get back to where they started. All for one mana. The second thing that I really like about this card is that putting it on the second from the top of the library is not optional. They need to do it. Some of these kind of cards let the controller decide if they want to put it on the bottom or the top of their library. So if you cast this on, let's say, Llanowar Elves on turn 7 against someone who only has 2 cards in hand, they must put it on the top of their library. But if they had the option, they'd likely put it on the bottom, because drawing a single mana dork is not the answer they need this late in the game. They need card draw or something to refill their hand or an answer. And Llanowar Elves that was already on the battlefield is not the answer they were looking for. I also like running this card's counterpart, which is Condemn, which is an instant, but I think that the sorcery speed of Oust is a fair trade against Condemn's instant speed, but only targeting an attacking creature. The last thing that I will say about this card is that the 3 life is negligible. People are willing to give 7 or 8 life away when casting Swords to Plowshares. This will always be 3 life, even if it hits a 10/10, and that usually won't make a difference at all. The last thing that I will say about this card that I like is that it puts people in an interesting predicament if you use it on their commander. You know, do they want to pay the commander tax in order to get access to their commander right away? Or do they want to put it 2 cards down in their library, lose a card draw, and get it and wait 2 turns to get it, but not have to pay the commander tax. So putting someone in that lose-lose situation, all for just 1 mana, is great in my opinion. Our final card that we're discussing today is Radiant Purge, which is played in only 0.05% of eligible decks, or just 1,343 total decks. This is a 2 mana white instant that says exile target multicolored creature or multicolored enchantment. This card has many great things going for it in my opinion. 1, it is an instant. 2, it's only 2 mana. 3, it exiles. And 4, it hits creatures or enchantments. Multicolor is a restriction, but in today's format, there's likely always something scary on the board that can be exiled that is multicolored. In fact, of the top 10 most played commanders in the format, this card would hit 80% of them. And for anyone who's curious, the 2 that it wouldn't hit is Krenko and Kenrith. So yeah, those 2, this wouldn't be an answer for, but for 80% of them, that's a pretty good bet. I think the tough thing about white is that the removal options will always be compared to debatably the greatest removal spell in the history of Magic the Gathering, which is Swords to Plowshares. But as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you are sick of having those auto includes because the other options are just so good, like swords, in your decks, maybe you want to try something new in that removal spot. This is a very unpopular option that you can slot in, and it can hit, like I said, some of the most played creature threats in the game and enchantments as well. So I'd love to hear what you think about the card and if you've ever personally used it. And do you have any other favorite underrated removal spells? If so, please drop it in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please check out my other videos where I cover more unpopular card options to give you ideas on how to make your decks feel like your own, as opposed to an EDHREC template. Thanks so much everyone for sticking around. I appreciate all of you, and we'll see you next time.